The implementation of the return of history in Nigerian schools. And of course, to set the foundation or to lay the foundation for our discussion this morning, Victor Azu has put together this background report.
Time was when secondary school students could vividly describe the old Oyo Empire, Songhai Empire, Borno Empire, and Mali Empire with words. This was made possible in the past when history was part of the subjects in the secondary school curriculum. History, simply defined, is the study of the past. It attempts to discover, collate, and interpret data or information, oral or written form, from the past, link it to the present, and adopt same for future plans. All that changed when government, in its wisdom, took a decision to delist history as a standalone subject of study in the primary and secondary schools.
History is very essential for making people understand exactly where they are from, the origins of the country, the struggles, isn't it, that led to the foundation of Nigeria as a whole, the vision of the forefathers who established this country. And I think these were issues that were missed, unfortunately, isn't it, by those who designed the curriculum at that time.
At the time, the argument in some quarters was that students were no longer attracted to the subject and not willing to pursue it as a degree course in the university. Expectedly, this gap bred a new generation of youth who could not understand the socio-political and economic realities of the country within the context of historical evolution. It was therefore a relief for all those who understand the import of history when the Federal Ministry of Education recently developed its Plan on Education for Change, a ministerial strategic plan 2016 to 2019, which contains several initiatives and activities to be executed, including the disarticulation of social studies and the reintroduction of the teaching of history in primary and secondary schools. One of the issues that historians had with the teaching of the subject in the past is that teachers paid less attention to the history of Nigeria and indeed Africa, an issue that the new curriculum is taking care of.
What we have done is to try as much as possible to make it Nigerian history, to teach about the history of Nigerian communities and Nigerian peoples. We have heroes and heroines to teach our children about our place, our traditional institutions, our government institutions, our democracy, how it evolved over time. So that aspect of dwelling so much on colonial and Western history has been reduced by this new move that we are making.
Somehow, the removal of history from the curriculum coincided with the disappearance of history books from the bookstands. Hopefully, its reintroduction will also bring about the re-emergence of history books. Guests are already seated in the studio to deepen the conversation.
Thank you very much, Victor Azu. And just as he said, guests are already here in the studio to deepen this conversation on implementing the reintroduction of history in Nigerian schools. I'll begin first by introducing Dr. Lami Amodu. She's the Director of Basic and Secondary Education. She's the Director of Basic and Secondary Education at the Federal Ministry of Education. Dr. Lami Amodu, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
And also we have with us Dr. Padun Joku. He's the President, International Institute of Leadership and Governance, and the immediate past Chairman of the National Examination Council, NECO. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Padun Joku.
Good morning, Nigerians.
Good morning.
Thank you.
All right. Also here with us in the studios in Abuja, we'd like to welcome Dr. Fidelis Egbe, who is the Public Relations Officer of the Historical Society of Nigeria, and he teaches history at Veritas University in Abuja as well. Dr. Egbe, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And joining us from our Enugu Network Center, we would like to welcome Professor Dan Okechukwu. Chukwu is, of course, a professor of history and head of the department at the Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Awka. Professor Chukwu, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Welcome, Nigeria and Nigerians.
All right, thank you. Let's back up a bit so that we have a clearer understanding. Rhoda, if you recall, we started this program by indicating that Good Morning Nigeria needed to take a bow for, as it were, instigating the return of the subject of history into the curriculum, because 3 years ago on this program,
that was in 2016.
Yeah, 2016, we actually tackled the subject and said, look, why is history not on the curriculum? Of course, it arose from a number of concerns being expressed by stakeholders, and the subject matter was dealt with extensively. And shortly after, the Federal Ministry of Education indicated that the subject was going to get back on the curriculum. But in the first instance, why was the subject expunged as a standalone item in Nigerian school curriculum? Dr. Amodu.
Thank you very much. The subject was expunged because it wasn't a policy of government to say expunge it as such, but there was there was much evidence to show that there was declining interest in the subject, and therefore many students were no longer taking, paying attention to history, or taking history as a course. And with that, it became critical for government to introduce other measures. So in the late 80s and early 90s, we found subjects like social studies coming on board. And with the introduction of social studies and government, of course, history lost its place, so to say. And with that, it became like a policy. And thereafter, we saw a situation whereby many people were no longer taking history, and it was no longer popular amongst students. But that did not preclude the fact that there were still students who were offering history at the senior secondary level. At the junior secondary school level, yes, there was a decline. There wasn't much interest, but it was still on the curriculum of the senior secondary schools. So this continued, and there were agitations from the public at a particular time. There were concerns raised from concerned individuals, the Historical Society of Nigeria, curriculum specialists, even the presidency and other individual stakeholders. Everybody raised concern, and this led to us taking the matter to the National Council on Education, which is the highest policy-making body, education. This was in 2016, in September 2016. And stakeholders discussed this matter critically, and it was agreed that NERDC, that's the Nigeria Educational Research and Development Council, be directed to take another look at the subject, to return it to the school curriculum.
You've just said something very critical here, that, a lot of students lost interest in history, or maybe they just didn't like history anymore. Nobody likes mathematics. And that's, even now that it's...
So you don't like mathematics?
Some people, a lot of people don't like mathematics, yes.
Some people, not
Some people, I would say, okay, let me not give it the number. Some people don't like mathematics. You're actually right. But then, what comes to mind now is how it's being taught, because it's been reintroduced, no doubt about that. But how it's going to be taught for people to have interest in it is another thing entirely. But I'd like Dr. Pardon Joko to actually come in here. She has just said part of the reasons why it was expunged from the curriculum. Were there any losses due to this, actually expunged? What did we lose in this?
Yeah, well, we lost a lot. Every human being is a historian in one way or the other. Every parent, and you will be a witness, Kingsley will be a witness, they will be a witness to the fact that somewhere along the line as a father, you have to tell your children their story, your story. How you met their mother, or how you met their father, and then the family story. That forms part of the history of the family. So every human being has to know history to be able to understand where they're coming from and where they're going. If you don't know history, you fail history. And when you fail history, you repeat history. And that's why they say history repeats itself. And it's always a very painful experience. So it's not enough to say that, as you said, some people don't like mathematics, but mathematics has been made compulsory for certain courses. And you must strive to pass mathematics to get onto those courses. At a certain time, the children, when there was government, there was social studies, they felt history was extraneous if they could do government. And mind you, they were looking forward to becoming some other things. A chap who wanted to read medicine felt that history wasn't necessary for him or her. Who wanted to read geology, for example, felt, but there is history of geology, there is history of medicine, there is history of everything. History forms part of human life. I think that we should look beyond the utility, the immediate direct utility of what is going to lead somebody to read and become. And then let the children know that it makes them become complete individuals. You know the joke I crack with them these days? Your children will say your village is mommy's village, is daddy's village. And if you ask them any question, you say 2 + 2, they bring out their thing and multiply. So I tell them, and add. I tell them one day you'll be asked, what is your father's name? They'll say, wait, let me find out. Okay? Because that depth, that profundity, that intellectual roundedness is no longer there, because we feel that some subjects don't lead us directly to other key professions we want to practice. And this, as you were saying, how do we teach them now to love and like the subject? These have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, Dr. Njoko, before we get to that, I'd like to bring in again the professional historians who are in our midst this morning. Nearest to us here is Dr. Fidelis Egbe, who is the PRO of the Historical Society of Nigeria. You listened to Dr. Lame Amodu give a historical account of what happened to the study of history in our elementary and secondary schools. And the impression created is that the subject just atrophied and therefore became moribund. What is the position of the Historical Society on this?
Well, first, why was history removed from the school curriculum? As she explained, she's correct. However, there is another dimension to it, probably an information that is less in the public, not in the public domain, that it is because people lost interest. They lost interest because of the nature of the curriculum then. That is very bogus scheme, which you have to study so much. But that was not the discouraging factor. Somewhere along the line, when this structural adjustment program was implemented, if he said that part of the requirement, maybe international community view and all that, was that it costs like history, which helps to build a nation, which lays the foundation for the children, for the coming generation to understand and have their identity, where they are coming from, their history, and be able to project the future. Such costs should be removed. Ask yourself, can somebody just wake up and remove a discipline, a subject that is a policy? If you want to remove mathematics, for instance, can one single person do that? No, it's a policy. And so somewhere there must be a hand from, the policymakers themselves. That was when social studies, civic education and all that were introduced, giving the explanations that they also contain the contents of history. So there are several reasons, many untold. But the good thing, however, is that history has been reintroduced into the school curriculum.
Yeah, good thing you say, but let's understand the history of why history was expunged in the first instance. Professor Chukwu in our network studios, who is head of department of history at Nnamdi Azikiwe University, what's your recollection of what happened to history.
Thank you, the anchorman and Nigerians. I recall, and I've said this on a number of occasions, and I've said this, I've written on this. If you read the book which I co-edited entitled Studies in Igbo History, published 2016, in the preface, among other things I said that led to the delisting of history from Nigerian curriculum could be attributed to the lopsided policy of governments, not just one government, both at the federal and state, in the 1980s, which led to the institutionalization of Ministry of Science and Technology and the establishment of universities of education, universities of science and technology. In doing so, government made a deliberate policy which tended to skew and delist the teaching and study of the humanities and the history in particular from the school system. And that was the period that history and the other humanities began to have a nosedive. At that period, Nigerian government had thought that by establishing universities of science and technology, ministries of science and technology, Nigeria will go to the sky. And we have come to know that ever since then, we have gone back to square one. So what I'm saying is that by that deliberate policy of lopsidedness of the 1980s and the 1990s, Nigeria tended to implement the teaching of science and technology, which were not even in terms of practicality implemented to the fullest. We have universities, we have secondary schools that have laboratories, are not in any way well equipped. So that was the beginning that revealed Nigerian society and Nigerian educational system and the history and the humanities in particular.
All right, Professor Chukwu, thank you very much there also for your perspective on the history of what happened to history. Now let's return to our studios. Dr. Lami Amodu, now that history is back, Dr. Fidelis Egbe of the Historical Society of Nigeria, and he also teaches history at Veritas University, did say that one of the challenges that history had at some point was the rather elaborate syllabus. So what is the nature of history being reintroduced now?
Yes, a clear directive was given to the NERDC then to enrich the syllabus, to make it more popular. Remember that when history was removed and the content was, when it was just a limited content in the social studies curriculum, the horizon, the scope was quite limited. And so when the subject was being returned, there was a clear directive that it should be enriched so that students would get the full value of the subject. And that was precisely what happened. So if you look at the curriculum right now, you'll see history taking its place as a standalone subject, no longer having just little pieces of this and that, civic education, social studies. No, it's a standalone subject and it has an enriched scope, which means also that all the facilities and other resources that are required to make that subject work are also put in place. An instance is that of the teacher factor, because if you have an enriched curriculum, you have to make effort to bring back the teachers. Prior to this time, because of the way the subject was subsumed into social studies, teachers had fizzled out, teaching government, teaching civics. But now you have to make sure that apart from bringing back the subject fully or placing it fully on the curriculum, teachers who should teach these subjects are also available. So these are some of the measures
Before
taken.
I go to Dr. Fidelis Egbe, I was going to ask you, it's now a standalone subject. Is it compulsory or it's an elective course?
It is an elective course. But at the basic level, it is there for all the students at the basic education level.
When you say basic, what do you mean?
That's the primary school level to the first 3 years of secondary education.
That's junior secondary
yes,
school.
Yes, it is listed there. So, and all students must take these courses.
What is the content? Can we have a sense of what the content is like at the basic level, for instance?
At the basic level, you're looking at the national history, the history of nation, and also all that transpired before independence, after independence, and projecting into the future. History itself is about past events, but also looking at current events and helping you to plan and prepare to come up with a future, how you can make a greater, come up with a greater future. So that's what...
Dr. Phyllis Egbe, I'd like us to take you from what she said earlier, and that is the fact that a lot of people students, tend to lose interest in the study of history because of how cumbersome the curriculum actually is. But then, are there misconceptions about the subject history?
First, you know that history is a very, very interesting subject. Very, very even if you are in the sciences, because it is a story of things that happen, it must interest you. People don't have misconception, except that because of the voluminous nature then of what you have to read, people tend to, those who don't have the habit or the interest in reading or lengthy things, those are the people who lose interest or lost interest in history. Otherwise, there are no misconceptions.
Professor Chukwu Enugu, I want to ask you this question. Do you have an idea of what the curriculum looks like now with the reintroduction of history at the basic and secondary schools level? Because those are the products that will eventually come to you in the university. And if so, are you satisfied with what you have seen?
Yes, to a large extent, I have an idea about the contents of the new curriculum. It has taken care of the locals, the history of the local people, and not just history at the national level. As Dr. Amodo has said, it has taken care of the locals, history and cultures of Nigerian people, and not just what used to be history of the big kingdoms or the big empires. The current curriculum has been able to take into account histories of the minority groups that constitute the Nigerian Federation. And that's one thing that is quite interesting about the new curriculum. And I believe that if this step is taken and taken further in future with a revision, more and more will be incorporated. But for now, I am satisfied with what is there. I said it because the Historical Society of Nigeria, to which I belong, and I was in the vanguard of the movement that got history to where it is. For 8 years, one as a council member for 4 years, 4 years, and then vice president of the society for 4 years. And I was part of the movement. I was part of all the meetings. I was part of the delegations to the presidents. I was part of the delegations and even the writing of the curriculum for the new policy. And so I am satisfied, and I believe that with time, what we will have as students at the university level would have changed. Because for now, what we have as a qualifying paper, among other qualifying papers, is the use of government, and the quality at the university level of teaching of history is not quite encouraging because of the use of government as a qualifying paper. But I believe that with the new curriculum and with the introduction of the level of the policy at the primary and secondary school level, with time, the quality at the university level will considerably improve.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Chukwu. Back to our studios here. Paddy Njoku, I'd like you to speak to the issue of the content of history in the new curriculum. We're not going to reel out everything here, and we're not going to say, okay, let's back up to our generation when we studied history in elementary, so in post-elementary, to know the contents. Because I'm just imagining that there are many factors that may have accounted for all of this. Will it be out of place, for instance, if we didn't have ancient history, where you talked about Egyptian civilization, you talked about the Greek city-states, you talked about Assyria, talked about Mesopotamia, and all the great Aztec kingdoms, and so on and so forth. And then you also, depending on the levels, and then they also tended to localize part of the history in elementary school. If you are, say, you're schooling in Borno, for instance, by the time you are leaving elementary school, the presumption is that you should know something about Ma Idris Aluma, and therefore the Kane Borno Empire. What are your thoughts?
You have forgotten the Benin Empire.
No, I didn't want to say that first. I mean, I can't forget that. I can't forget.
You actually said that.
I said that at the beginning
of the program.
The reign of the Ogisos,
Yes.
the Ogisos.
Yes.
I mean, all of that, how the Benin kingdom came into part, the relationship between Benin and Ife, and of course the argument that the Ife will always make about Oduduwa, we give birth.
Let me explain it.
Let me stop the controversy in the meeting.
We used to love history so much in those days because we said you could always negotiate some marks if you're bright enough from the history master. Once they said, what led to the fall of the Oyo Empire? As a bright student, you just pick your pen and say, the fall of the Oyo Empire was as a result of remote and immediate causes. The master will give you some. You may not even know the causes, and then you say, the vassal states and this, that, and corruption within the Oyomesi and all that. Quite interesting, where you could always get some marks and get on. Unfortunately, though, you harped on something very interesting. I discussed with the late Chinua Achebe when he was alive on why he wrote Things Fall Apart. He said he loved books so much, and at a certain time he could get into a library, and all the books he would see were books written by the colonizers about themselves, and nobody wrote our own story from our own point of view. And this is why you were talking about the history of the Assyrians and so on and so forth. Classical history that our colonizers read was what they initially imposed on us. And of course, there's some sort of, if you like, lack of commitment to it. When we started writing our own history, it became more interesting. And as Professor Osu just said now, he said they have even included other areas that were not in the previous syllabus. I've taken time to go through NECO syllabus, for example. What we tried to do was to make sure that the student who passed history knew not only about the world, the classical world we were talking about, but so much about Nigeria. Our struggle from before 1914, then from 1914, the amalgamation, then immediately after the amalgamation, how we struggled to get independence. When we got independence, how we went into the coup, the war, and then the successive coups until we got to the Fourth Republic. And I think it is requisite knowledge for every educated Nigerian. Whether you are a space scientist, you may meet some people in space who want to ask you about the history of Nigeria, and you should be able to tell them, otherwise they wonder where you're coming from. So I think the revision now is very important. the concentration is on African history, Nigerian history, the evolution of our polity, why we've gotten to where we are. Some of these children now don't know that we had 3 regions, then 4 regions, from there to 12 states, 19 states, 27, 36. And it is necessary for them to know this is where we are now concentrating, so that it becomes practical. And then when you get to any part of Nigeria, you feel part of that place you've gotten to. We shouldn't forget our Hausa Bokwai states, as I said, the Kanem Borno Empire, the Benin Empire, the Oyo Empire, but we should also let the children know that these empires gave rise to what we call Nigeria today. And that Nigeria, in fact, I call these children, when I joke with them, I say, you people are Statians. We are Nigerians. You know, because they will ask you, which state do you come from? They just know states. But you and I know that in those days, Nigeria was our constituency. And from there, we got to regions, from regions to few states, and so on and so forth. So I think that the subject will be made more interesting, the more practical it is made.
Still with you, Dr. Padin Joko.
Yes.
You just said something now that it's obvious that the children that we have these days do not have an understanding of where we're coming from. And it's very obvious most times when we talk about religious or when we talk about ethnic issues, it is obvious that they do not know where we are coming from due to some of the utterances that they make. Can we now, to what extent can we relate the challenges that we are going through as a nation right now with the lack of understanding of where we are coming from as a people?
Yes, that is not only a challenge for history, it's a challenge for all of us. People have to know that the Almighty God in His infinite wisdom created people differently. And that if everybody was one, the world would be monotonous. That's why He created them male and female, black and white. And then inside Nigeria, if we understand our history very well, we can now appreciate these other people. Those other people are there to complement us. So the task is not only for historians, it's also for value orientation teachers to say that you cannot live alone or by your own tribe. There's no single tribe. Look at what's happening in Israel. The Palestinians are there. So it's a major task for us Nigerians to let people know that it is not by being Igbo or Yoruba or Hausa that you become perfect. It is by being able to understand the other person. Our people have always used the word tolerance and this, that, religious tolerance. It's rather accommodation. And once you get educated, it should be a widening of your mind to accommodate differences and manage differences. This is where we have found most lacking.
All right, Dr. Padin Joko, thank you very much. Let's bring in again Dr. Fidelis Egbe. I'd like you to speak to the reintroduced history subject in terms of the content of the curriculum, so at the basic level and secondary level, and how this might impact on the teaching of the subject at the tertiary level.
Thank you. The new curriculum is designed in such a manner that it takes the child through a gradual process. From the primary level, you are introduced to Nigerian history, because a very good knowledge of Nigerian history will help the child to understand what the Nigerian state is like and build on. By the time you're moving from primary 1 to primary 6, we are gradually, the new syllabus gradually introduce, the West African and African history, gradually. Not a very high dose of it, but the most important things. And by the time you leave the primary school and you are getting to the secondary school, at that stage, the new curriculum introduces you to, these empires and other history. The reason for this is because it will enable the child have a gradual understanding rather than at primary school, you are taught about Kanem Bonum Empire, you are taught about the Benin Empire, you are taught about the, a whole large history and classical histories. The child gets confused, and that was why many people lost interest in history. But now, because the new curriculum, follow certain stage that as you grow in your academics, you need first what is important for us Nigerians is to understand Nigerian history. And if the child understands that Nigerian history, the good dose, then from there the child can be able to understand West African history, and of course the larger world. And then that is very good because it lays a very good foundation for the teaching of the course in tertiary institutions. Right now, as a lecturer, what I have noticed is that most of those who study history in university level, they did not study history at undergraduate level, because when you check between 1983, when the subject was yanked off from the school curriculum till now, check how many years it is. And most of those children who didn't study that history are those studying history now. And so we as teachers are now compelled to begin to tell them what is history. Nigeria got independence in 1960. Nigeria was amalgamated in 1914. These were the factors, whereas these are the things they ought to have learned from the primary to the secondary level. By the time we get to the university level, we are talking about advanced history and critical analysis and interpretation of events. So the new curriculum takes that stage so that it makes the job of the lecturer at the tertiary institution easier. You don't now go back to start telling the child the basic things. You go to the higher things and the child will understand.
All right, let's go to our Enugu Network Center where we have still have Prof there, Professor Chukwu. Prof, as it stands now that the subject has been reintroduced, what is the teaching capacity? What is the professional strength of history as a subject in Nigeria right now? I'm saying this because it's been expunged for some time. Do we still have that professional capacity? Do we still have that teaching strength now that it's been reintroduced?
Thank you very much. That's why I had earlier said that it's not yet to huru. I say this because there are challenges that face professional historians. Some of them are teachers at university levels. Others are teachers, call them lecturers, at some other levels. But then, seeing the reintroduction of the subject into the system from primary school level through the secondary school level, is a big challenge. It calls for re-energization of efforts on the part of everybody to ensure that books are written and are written from the Nigerian perspective. As some of the contributors have said, in the past, the curriculum and the books, journals, name them, that were written or churned out, were skewed into favoring the foreigners, our colonizers. But now that we are talking about Nigerian history, and in a bid to think of how to build a nation called Nigeria, for now we are not a nation, we are a country. We have to write books from that perspective, writing books. Historians are challenged to write in simple languages that the primary school child, the secondary school child will understand. Apart from writing books, I'm of the opinion that there should be seminars to sensitize, seminars, workshops, local conferences. I want to praise the Historical Society of Nigeria for its annual congress that normally holds about October. But beyond the National Congress, I think we should devolve. We should go down to the grassroots, plan to ensure that Nigerians are sensitized, even at the secondary school level, and let there be a deliberate policy by government to ensure that more teachers of history are trained so that we will meet the challenges that we now face. There are lots of challenges, but I know that these challenges will be surmounted over time. But there has to be, all hands should be on deck by writing books, organizing workshops, organizing conferences, and seminars to ensure that more sensitization effort is integrated into the society, and so that everybody, not just historians, everybody will be carried along to make the exercise a success. I've always said that history is a midwife because you find history, like some of the contributors have said, in everything we do. And the role of a midwife is to ensure that everything is done in a perfect way to ensure that a child is delivered in safety. Thank you.
Just before, very briefly, let me just ask you, Prof, what is this issue with, okay, I want to gain admission into the university and I scored maybe 150, 160 or 180 and I applied to read law, and probably simply because my cut-off mark is not up to that, you're given history. Or I applied to read mass communication and they say, oh, your cut-off mark is not enough, just go and read history.
This has been so, I as the head of the department for the past 5 years, I've seen such challenges, I've encountered those challenges. People tend to see history as a dumping ground for people who have not made it for law or some other best in quotes, courses. And so they now come to history. But I've always made them know that history is not a dumping ground. History has its value, not just for now, but in future. And so I even make it known to the authority, the management of the university, that they should not post people that have not been offered admission. However, I think with into other departments to history. But I do know that with the new policy, this will have a change. History, not just at the primary, secondary, but at the tertiary institution, has a brighter future. That misconception, that idea of posting people who have not done well in other areas to study history will change. And that's why I call on my colleagues, my professional colleagues as historians, and all stakeholders to ensure that this policy
Professor Chukwu, thank you very much for the point you have raised. I think that in pursuit of the last leg of the question that Rhoda asked, maybe we can return again to this question. Why study history? And what is the value of a historian? People just assume that, it's storytelling. Paddy Joko earlier was talking about embedded history. As if you are an economist, you come across history. If you are a stockbroker, you come across history. If you are an engineer, you come across history. So, but why study history?
Thank you very much. You see, just as you pointed out, the value of a historian, you cannot just quantify it. Because a historian is the custodian of knowledge.
Yeah.
And government policies, every decision government makes and takes is premised on the depth of the knowledge of history that government has. And so you find out that the historian is like the pathway, the light with which a nation sees. So the value of a historian in any society, in any country, is so important. And if you do not study history, how will you be able to advise government? How will you be able to function? For instance, here you are. If you don't have a good knowledge of history, how will you be able to communicate the issues you are raising here, even within your establishment? So you see that the value of a historian, you cannot really place a value to say this is the amount, because it is very, very, very important. And so we study history because there is the need to build capacity, to build knowledge, and also to be the light of the society. Wherever you find a historian in any society, any historian that is worth his salt and knows his onions, that society progresses. And part of the problem we've had in Nigeria over time is that the emphasis on history that has been down has affected national policies and issues. But I believe that now, with the reintroduction of history, with the interest in history, in historical studies, even government policies will change for better because of the involvement of historians.
Rhoda, I'm sorry. I want to pursue this further. I just want to bring in this aspect. I'm taking the liberty of going back to Professor Njoku to also speak to this. I listened to a recent inaugural lecture. It was delivered last month by Professor Sareme Osadolo at the University of Benin. And in the content of the lecture, he did reference the fact that there is a misconception of history as an art subject, that indeed there is a scientific side to history in terms of the analytics. What kind of discipline does that give you as a historian, higher up the ladder? You have a question?
No, I think you were talking to Professor Chukwu.
Yeah, sorry, I said Professor Chukwu rather. Where Chukwu Njoku? Professor Chukwu, right, if you had the question, please take it. And if you picked it, well, let me return to Fidelis Egbe, but respond to what the question I asked, yes.
History is said to be a science because of its methodology. Critical analysis and interpretation. History is not just storytelling. The historian goes about his job in an orderly manner, in the same manner that a scientist in the laboratory will carefully put his experiment through stages until he comes out with the final product. So also is history, and it is in that sense that history is regarded as a science. But of course, history is in the humanities. But it is the methodology of history, the careful manner, the discipline in which the historian himself, the tasking manner which the historian himself goes about his work.
And the peer review.
Yes. Yes, because if, for instance, I want to find out why NTA is the largest network in Africa, I will not just go to one person and get an information and leave it at that. I need to go to other countries in Africa and find out the capacity they have in their television stations before I come to the conclusion that yes, NTA is indeed the largest in Africa and the best. So it is the careful manner and the more details that the historian goes about his job, that is why history is regarded as a science. And a historian who has attained that level, especially at the professorial level, must have attained the level of personal discipline through that methodology. You don't just go about doing things anyhow, and you don't just come to conclusions based on hearsay. You must have several evidence, as we call it in history, several evidence that you put together to draw your inference.
All right, Dr. Felix Egbe, I'd like you to speak to something when we return from the break, and that is the average Nigerian youth who is looking at, being out of school and getting something tangible to do. The question on his mind is, if I read history, aside working in the education sector, where else can I work? Can I work in a bank? Can I work? What is there for me if I read history? But that will be after the break.
With different skills. And like the game football, we all have a position to play. And the strikers? They are the go-getters. They break barriers and steal the show. To win, we must come together as one team. We must play as Nigeria united.
Why don't you people sell imported materials here?
Welcome, ma'am.
As beautiful as the shop is.
Auntie. Buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality.
Really?
And to make Nigeria great again, that is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, you're welcome back. And if you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. And we are looking at or speaking to the issue of the implementation of the reintroduction of history in Nigerian schools. And just before we went on the break, I posed a question to Dr. Fidelis Egbe. And I'd like every one of us here, to speak to this issue. History is not termed a professional course. People say, oh, you have to read law, you have to read medicine. And so as a result, you see young people say to themselves, I don't want to just leave school and not have something tangible to do. As an historian, if I read history, you read history, I'm sure, and you are in the teaching profession as we speak. So if I were an employer of labor and I own a bank or I own a manufacturing industry, of what use to me?
Thank you. First, let me say that when you say history is not a professional course, I think that's a misconception. I'm a professional historian. First degree, second degree, third degree, all in history. Now, you see, a professional historian is that person who has been so well trained in the arts of history. And the historian is the most, at the risk of sounding boastful now because it's my discipline, but the historian is the most employable person because by the training of a historian is trained to fit in anywhere, in any establishment. It's not as a teacher. I chose to be a teacher because at the level of PhD, if I apply here now, they may not employ me here. Unless as a consultant.
We'll speak to the DJ on your behalf.
Unless as a consultant.
We employ you. We can't employ you.
But the historian is trained to work wherever a human being exists. A historian is useful and important there. And so the issue of jobs is not a problem. For instance, let's look at Nigeria, for instance. If you check the contemporary Nigerian society now, you will find out that historians are in several positions. For instance, the General Buratai is a historian. The director of NYSC is a historian. About 2 governors who have just been elected into offices now, the new governors, are all historians. So you find out that a historian is employable anywhere, even in the bank, even in the hospitals. For instance, a historian is very useful in the hospital because there are records that must be kept. If you go to a doctor for consultancy, the first question the doctor wants to know is your medical history. Now, in well-established hospitals, it is the responsibility and duty of the historian to be able to keep these records. How was Nigeria able to tackle Ebola to the surprise of the whole Western world? It was because of the knowledge of history, which was applied in the tackling of Ebola. That's why Nigeria is Ebola-free today. So a historian should not be afraid, or youths who are coming up, who are studying history, should not begin to think, where will I work after studying history? No, you will work wherever human being exists.
I think that's something to Kingsley employers of labor should also know.
Well,
yes.
You posed the question to the guests. I'm not a guest on this program. So, but I want to take the I want to take the liberty of also introducing this because the subject is not just to the young persons and their parents, who are seeking admission. History has a number of branches. We're just talking, first you raised the question about how can you work in a bank. There is economic history. I think Walter Ofanagoro, one of the former director generals of NTA, he was an economic historian. It will be surprising if the Central Bank of Nigeria, for instance, doesn't have graduates of history with specialization in economic history.
Maybe.
I will also be surprised, for instance, if Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs doesn't have graduates of history with specialization in diplomatic history. I will be surprised also if at the NTA, or now the Nigerian Army University, you don't have historians whose specialization is military history.
They do. They do. And maybe I should just add this. At the last convocation of my university, Veritas University, the best graduating students came from the Department of History. And they were immediately offered a job at Zenith Bank.
Congratulations. All right, now let's, Dr. Lami Amodu, you've been soaking all of this up. I just, you of course, will make other comments, but I want to return also to a subject you were driving at earlier, which Professor Chukwu also touched on, namely personnel, making personnel available to be able to teach these subjects, basic, secondary, and tertiary. Take that along with texts, availability of texts. Because it's one thing to be teaching. If you remember the old historians that we had, a number of them, of course, are no more with us. Professor Ade Ajayi, Professor Adele Afigbo, Professor Igbafe, Professor Baro Ikime. Those are historians. So what are we going to do in terms of replenishing the stock of teachers of history and then providing suitable texts for study? Yes.
There is indeed a dearth of materials in the area of history education. And the NERDC, apart from organizing stakeholder workshops, writing workshops, critique workshops, also tries to reach out to professionals, in the area of teaching. At the university level, the lecturers who have bias for history, or who are professionals in the history profession, are still writing. And the Ministry of Education tries to encourage, the writing of history books and texts that can be useful to students. So whenever we have an annual general meeting of principals, for instance, we encourage those who have materials in these areas to come and present them, so that principals of unity colleges can be acquainted. And this doesn't end only at the federal level. At the state level too, the ANCOPs also try to promote the writing of history materials. And to a great extent, I think that, with continuous review of the books that are in circulation and the writing of new materials, more materials will be available to teachers.
Kingsley will take our tweets soon, but just before we take our tweets, I'd like Dr. Padinjoku very quickly, in just a minute if you can. Is there a need for anyone that is aspiring to be a leader in Nigeria to have some level of education in history?
Absolutely. If you don't know the history of the people you are leading, and like I said, if you don't know the history of the nation itself, you will make the same mistakes that were made in the past, that we paid for very dearly, and you can see some of them roaming around now, some of those threats. So it's absolutely necessary. I also teach leadership. You cannot lead without knowing whom you are leading, how they got to where they are, and how their problems came up. And before my minute expires, I tell you we had this problem. I took a first degree in French, in modern languages. And some of us had the problem, what are you going to do with French? So we agitated in the department later that, look, you should now design teaching French with something. French with marketing, French with one practical subject or the other. So the people were selling fast. As Kingsley said, every bank, for example, needs a historian for research, for financial research, for banking research, for history. And so virtually every field of endeavor needs a historian in their field.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Padu Joko. Let's take the tweets that we have. We have your reactions via Twitter handle at NTA GMN. If you have any contributions, you have comments, you have questions, you can send it via Twitter handle. It's at NTA GMN. Our first tweet is from Festus Akimbo Yohani. Tweets: our children who have been distracted by so much social media have a lot to benefit from reintroduction of history into our school curriculum. At least they will be made to be concerned about the doings of their obscure ancestors, where they come from, and where they might end up.
Now, Law Alpha C tweets, the reintroduction of history is a step in the right direction, in the sense that the principles of moral upbringing would be rescued from extinction. It's noble to retreat to the metamorphosis of our esteemed history, more so when we are witnesses to the damage the borrowed way of life from Western countries has done to our society.
And Dilly Jack Solomon tweets, he says, the importance of history to nation building, national identity, patriotism, and overall human development cannot be overemphasized. The reintroduction will deepen positive understanding of our traditional values and identities, as well as the similarities and differences between the various people in Nigeria.
Mike Anyakwo, now this is a welcome development. It will surely liberalize the minds of our children, and unfortunately many of our children had lost sight completely when the subject was hitherto removed. They didn't appear to know anything about historical antecedents.
Joseph tweets, it says, kudos to the present government for reintroducing history. When you don't know what happened in the past, how can you know how to deal with the present issues? It's very good and a welcome development.
Now, Dele Jack Solomon has this other tweet. It says, the reintroduction of the subject will help Nigerian children better appreciate the contributions and sacrifices of people in the past.
But Amasi Adamu tweet, says, it's the predetermined rules of that governs the society, to know that antagonism between clashes or hitherto divided society, that's a struggle. Okay, but Amasi Adamu, I can't really make out what you're trying to say here. But then let's move on to Festus Akimbo Yohani. So there's no doubt that history is essential in terms of preparation for adult life. Now that history has been reintroduced into our school curriculum, our history teachers and teaching community must be empowered to teach the subject efficiently to make it relevant to our youths.
Now, Quara Connect, it says, I served with a colleague from Enugu State who didn't appear to know anything much about Nigerian history. In fact, when I was talking to her about Nigeria, she took it like lectures and was very happy to have known something about the country. Now, the reintroduction of history will therefore deepen the positive understanding of our traditional values and identities.
Pastor Mani Akpantu said the return of history in our academic curriculum is a commendable move. People who ignore the past miss a major ingredient for contemporary nation building. Little wonder history keeps repeating itself in this country.
Magbala Hombabs, one of our regulars. People ignorant of their history are bound to remain underdeveloped. It's a great milestone that the federal government decided to reintroduce the study of history.
And Ayola Adeni tweet, says, any nation that loses its history has lost its dignity. Reintroduction of history in Nigerian schools is a welcome development.
Okay, we have this tweet coming from this second set of tweets. This one doesn't have an ID. So we just we'll take it out because it's very significant what the writer is putting across. History is the mother of all subjects. There was no need to remove it in the first place. The study of history is the beginning of self-consciousness and the foundation for the development of any society.
And Emmanuel Washili tweeted, said one of the reasons history failed in schools is because the curriculum focused on Nigeria during and after the British colonization. What happened to everything before that? Did the people that make up Nigeria not exist?
Osene has this tweet. History was yanked off because those in power then, the military era, thought that people wouldn't be able to recall the atrocities they had foisted on the people. However, history will always be told, like it or not.
And Wanuji Joshua, he said the disappearance of a whole subject for decades is a scandal, and those behind its disappearance should be held responsible for it. One day mathematics will also disappear and to be reintroduced in the future. Thank you.
Now, this is from Baba Gana Mohammed. If we don't teach or tell them our history, someone else will, and the danger is that it might not necessarily be the true narrative.
And the Chris Simon tweet says it will be a nice move because modernization has made us forget our societal value. History helps us trace our origin and gives us an ancestral heritage.
All right, those are the set of tweets that we can take. Let's go to Professor Chukwu again. That's Professor Dan Okechukwu at our Enugu Network Center to get your closing thoughts on this subject matter. In your opinion, what needs to be done, if you like, on the short term to re-excite interest in the subject which has now been reintroduced from basic up to secondary level?
Yes, I think much is being expected of the teachers. As earlier said, the curriculum is good, but effectiveness, efficiency on the part of the teachers at all levels should be exciteful so that students and at all levels will be carried along. So books should be written in a simple language, and in doing so, delivery should also be very important so that when this is done, a large number of students now doing history, studying history, and Nigeria will be better for it in the very near future.
Thank you very much, Professor Dan Okechukwu, Head of History Department, Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. Thank you very much for being a part of the program this morning. All right, so let's get your closing thought, Dr. Fidelis Egbe.
Well, for history to be taught properly, I think we need to engage professional historians to teach history so that they can be able to apply the historical method in the teaching of history in our junior schools.
Dr. Lami, your closing thoughts.
The importance of history has been emphasized over and over again. All hands must be on deck to ensure that it remains on the timetable, on the school curriculum, so that it doesn't disappear again for whatever reason. However, the federal government has taken clear leadership in this direction by engaging over 500,000 teachers to, as an emergency measure, to make sure that we have professional teachers in this area at the basic level. So we hope that this will also encourage more professionals at the other levels, senior, secondary, and tertiary.
All right, Dr. Padinjoku.
Yes, Dr. Amodu and Rhoda, because history was written by he, that's probably why it disappeared. You people should now add her story. So all right. The ladies should now try to write also so that we combine history and her story and then make sure it remains permanent.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Padinjoku. That's noted. We've taken note of that.
Good.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Padinjoku is the president of International Institute of Leadership and Governance and, of course, the former or the past immediate chairman of the National Examination Council, NECO. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
My pleasure.
Dr. Lami Amodu, Director of Basic and Secondary Education, Federal Ministry of Education. Ma'am, we thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
And also Dr. Fidelis Egbe. He's the PRO History Society of Nigeria and a lecturer at the Department of History and International Relations, Veritas University, Abuja. It was indeed our pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now let's join our sports desk for the latest in the world.